Hi everyone. I am coming to you live today from the Purple Parlor. My name is Ginger Gaines-Sorelli. I'm hoping some folks are joining me. One of the things I have realized in the last couple of weeks is that I have not mastered many things on various technologies. One of them that I will figure out, maybe I'll figure it out by next week, is how to make sure I see who's coming online and if there are comments. I haven't necessarily done that so far. So I hope folks are able to join me. I see some folks. I do see the thing that says that there are some folks who are with me right now. So I want to welcome all of you. Again, my name is Ginger Gaines-Sorelli. I'm the senior pastor at Foundry United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. And every Wednesday at noon Eastern Time, I share a few thoughts, a few ponderings from the Purple Parlor here in my home, as together we continue to make this journey through sheltering in place, many of us in our homes alone or with other folks in our families. And this is one way that we can stay spiritually connected even as we are socially distant from one another. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm glad that you're joining me. And today I had a plan for what I thought I would talk about, which is interesting because I don't always, sometimes it's very clear and sometimes not so much. This was one of those weeks when I thought, I know what I want to sort of ponder together with people this week. And then this morning, maybe sort of leaning last night, and then it continued over into this morning, I woke up with a different thing in my mind, heavy on my mind and in my heart, and that is lament, the idea of lament. And so I'm going to start there today with the idea and the practice of lament. I don't know about you, but there are certain moments in my life where all of a sudden things that I know are real, that I know are happening in the world, it seems like all of a sudden it just flows over me and lands in a way that feels so heavy. And maybe I'd been distracted, or I'd been focused on other things, or I had found a way to kind of compartmentalize that awareness of those hard, painful, heavy things that were going on in my life or in the world. But then all of a sudden it's like something opens and it rushes over me, and I feel heavy with the weight of grief and worry, pain and sadness. And I've had a bit of that happening over the last few days as I've been aware of a number of things. One is the growing weight of anxiety and stress, the ways that depression is beginning to really flare. I mean, if we thought it was bad a few weeks ago, it feels like that just may be intensifying. Some conversations that I've had with friends and others who are really struggling right now to find any grounding and to believe that things are going to be okay. And then just the ongoing headlines and the ways that I am so fearful about decisions that are being made that put many of our most vulnerable neighbors in jeopardy of being infected with the virus, as they are caught in this tension between going to work, which now many places are opening businesses and folks are going to be required to go to work, because if they don't go to work, then they will lose their eligibility for their unemployment benefits. I'm concerned about the small business owners who are struggling right now to maintain, to figure out how to get through this time when many of them haven't received the support that was promised or supposedly set aside for them to be able to get through this time. I'm deeply grieved and pained by yet another public revelation of what we know goes on. Well, maybe not all of us know, but I hope more and more of us will come to be aware and perceive that regularly in our country today, there are still Black and brown neighbors who are being harmed, who are being the victims of modern day lynchings. And so as I see these stories come up, as they flash across my screen, as they settle into my mind and my heart, I start to feel again this weight, this heaviness, and I want to cry out in lament. And lament is something that we don't do very well, I don't think, as an American culture. The church should help us do it, but many parts of the church have really lost the regular practice of lament, the way to really honor lament. And that's mostly true for churches that are mostly populated by folks who are more comfortable, maybe who have a little higher level of privilege in their lives, because it's easier to not lament when things are relatively okay. But one of the things that our tradition calls us to, particularly if we are being drawn into and seeking to be faithful to the prophetic traditions of our scriptures, it is to pay attention to the places where there is pain and to cry out, to name the pain, to allow what's happening to our human family to affect us, because it does affect us, but to take it seriously and to pay attention to it and allow it to be held in our own selves and not just think it's about someone else. This is part of what our Judeo-Christian tradition offers us, is a space and a way and narratives and practices to identify injustice, to identify evil and oppression in our world, and to not just sort of say, oh well, but to do something about it. But I think the thing is that a lot of times we want to rush in and try to fix something. But what I want us to sort of consider for a moment today is the practice of just sitting with the pain of it, with the feelings that come up, perhaps feelings of rage, perhaps feelings of helplessness, perhaps feelings of despair, perhaps feelings of just being overwhelmed with all of that at one time. We're afraid of that, I think, because it can feel like it can swallow us up. But it's important, I think, for us to give ourselves permission and to trust God enough to sit in those emotions, to look at the pain in the world and not be numbed and oblivious. It's part of this whole movement that encourages us to wake up, to stay woke, as they say. Like, wake up, perceive what is going on, pay attention, don't look away, look at it, force yourself to look. We don't do this so that we just, feel bad. It's not about just feeling angry or bad or ragey or guilty or whatever it is that comes up in connection to that. We do that so that we might see and invite God to help us move into that place of pain, to touch it and hopefully to be in solidarity. And then, by God's grace, maybe, eventually, to move through that into a place where we can be agents of healing, agents of justice, agents of mercy. But it starts with naming the pain, perceiving it, naming it, and allowing ourselves to stay in it a minute. I've been struck so many times over the years by the ways that the prayers of the Psalms help us see this and practice it. So often a psalm, even one of the most famously quoted psalms, Psalm 22, is the psalm that Jesus quoted from the cross, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" If you go and look at that psalm, you see that this place of lament, this crying out, doesn't stay in that place. And like so many psalms, the cry of lament, the cry of pain, the cry of suffering is where it starts, and it just continues, and it's raw. And then all of a sudden there's a shift. You sit in that, you cry out, you let it out, you feel it all, and then there's something that happens so often in those prayers, a shift into a place of praise, into a place of gratitude, of turning to God. And that's where I thought I was going to start today, is with gratitude. But what I realized as I was holding all of the things that were bubbling around in my mind is that they're connected. Lament and gratitude. If you look at the Psalms, you see so often that connection. There's a short poem that I came across recently by Robert Penn, P-Y-N-N. I want to share it with you. It says this: remember your gratitude even when the beasts are at the door. Do not hold it hostage to your happiness. It is embedded in your heart. Let it out, even while you are weeping. And that resonates with me at a really deep place, because I have this experience that I kind of look back to many years ago where I was really in a place of lament. I felt overwhelmed with grief. My father was nearing the end of his life and had been suffering for so many years with Parkinson's disease, which is, if any of you know, some of you will, is just a horrible, horrible disease. And things in the world seemed to just be spinning out of control, and I was in the midst of a lot of, just surrounded by a lot of suffering. And I was walking kind of intentionally, sort of contemplative walk, and I just was letting myself sit in this place of suffering and lament, and just calling all of it up and really feeling and being a little afraid by it, because I felt like I was just going to be consumed by this grief, and that was really probably the deepest well within me, was this deep grief. And then there was a moment of turning. All I can say is it feels like it was a moment of God's grace, because there was something that all of a sudden started to come up, and my mind was filled with image after image after image of beautiful gifts I had received, strengthening gifts I had received, moments when people were present to me when I was just a mess. There were images and words and memories that just filled my mind. I couldn't have done this on my own, because this stuff was coming from places I was tucked down way down in there, and it was just like, whoo! And all of a sudden, I just felt overwhelmed with gratitude. With gratitude, I thought, oh my God. Literally, oh my God. You have been with me. You have allowed me to receive so many gifts, even in the midst of a life that can be so overwhelmingly difficult, confusing and painful and unjust. And in those moments, in that moment, I had a realization. It was like that movement so often in the Psalms of starting in a place of just raw suffering and grief, and then out of nowhere, praise for the presence of God. That happens in that Psalm of Jesus, where Jesus cries out. It moves to a place of praising God. Take a look, Psalm 22. And I'm reminded of another line that I've shared recently and several times from a poem. I won't read the whole thing. It's a poem called A Brief for the Defense by a poet named Jack Gilbert. But he has a line where he says, "To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil." Let's say that again. Some of you have heard me quote this before, but I'm going to say it again in case you haven't. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. And that is to say, there is, even in moments of suffering, we need to look at it. We need to name it. We need to not turn away. We need to allow ourselves to feel what we feel, but also to allow the deeper place within us, that deeper wellspring of God's presence and grace that attends us, to be present with us in the furnace, in the struggle, in the storm. Because it's in that place that we're reminded that our praise belongs to God, who is with us. and that there is more than the suffering, there is more than the injustice, and that because God is with us, we will be given resources to keep walking. It doesn't make it easier. It doesn't take the injustice away magically. It doesn't clean or tidy things up in our lives or in the world, but it gives us resources so that we might stand in the midst of it with compassion and love and know we're not alone. And even when we are still raging, to know that God is holding us there, that God is with us there, that God will continue to be with us there. And then at some moment out of nowhere, it seems that the trend in our tradition is that we'll be reminded, we'll be a turning, there'll be a moment of grace when we'll say, oh my God, you've been with me through it all. And you're with the person that I can't be with right now, who's suffering. With the mother whose son has been shot. You're with us in that place. Oh my God, I'm so grateful. It's a strange connection between lament and gratitude. But the gratitude I'm talking about is that gratitude that reminds us that we are part of something much bigger. We're connected to one whose love holds all things. And even when we can't believe that, we don't feel it, and we're feeling completely cut off, I give thanks that there will be those who will continue to show up in flesh and blood and be God's love and be God's grace and hold on to us. And I pray today that each one of us will find ways to do that for someone. I also want to encourage you to give yourself permission to lament. You may be there. You may feel great today and cheerful, and that's good. But lament is part of our spiritual tradition. It's an honored part of our tradition. It connects us to people's suffering. It helps us stay connected to ours. And if we're missing that piece, if we're not paying attention to the pain and the suffering in the world, then our hope, our joy is going to be very thin. I once had a good colleague who taught me that hope isn't hope. Christian hope is not hope until it's been crucified. We have to allow ourselves to see that the promise is that life comes even in the midst of suffering and on the other side of the worst the world can do. I'm going to keep reminding us of that as we journey through this time. I think that's what I have today. I may talk about gratitude a bit more next week because it's important. It's a healing thing. But I think that's where I'm going to close us today. Let yourself feel what you're feeling and know that God is there with you. Let's pray. God, today I pray for every person who is in pain, every person who is sick, every person who is grieving, every person who is raging at injustice in this world, every person who is the victim of injustice in this world, every person who is having to walk into places that are not safe just to keep food on their table or a roof over their heads. I pray for everyone this day that is feeling empty, anxious, depressed, and needs you more than ever. I pray, oh God, that you would be with us and let us be where we are in our lament and in our rejoicing. Help us remember, oh God, give us moments of grace to remember that you are with us and that we are we have so much to be grateful for, even in the midst of this moment of suffering. I pray it in the power of Jesus, who is our sign in flesh, that the promise of Easter is real. Amen. Thanks for being with me today. And I hope that you will continue to stay connected, that you'll join me again next Wednesday. Stay connected with me every day on Facebook if you want to follow me on Facebook. I'm also trying to figure out how to use Instagram. Lord have mercy. I'm also going to be preaching on Sunday. So if you want to join us on Sunday at 11:15, I'd love for you to join us there. And please do continue to reach out and stay connected to other folks. My continued reminder is we are in this storm together. We are not in the same boat. So make sure that you're not only taking care of your boat, but reaching out to take care of somebody who might be in a vessel that's not very secure. And stay safe. Stay home if you can. And may God's grace and peace abide with you deep, deep within. Peace, friends.